Happy birthday, Jill Dando Institute. You being 20 means I'm 20 years older, which doesn't merit much celebration. But as father, or at least a parent for JDI, I am hugely proud of what's been achieved in the last 20 years. I am a journalist by background and not an academic. I flunked out of my PhD to go into broadcasting. But oddly, it was as a broadcaster that this came about, because I saw the need for a new institute, indeed for a new discipline, because I was working with the police in crime on crime appeal shows. And although criminology has improved dramatically in the last 20 years, back in the 1990s, most of my contact with it was with sociologists or people more concerned with political theory, more interested in offenders than in victims, more interested in criminals than in crime. Where were the scientific and practical answers to crime? Where were the levers that could really cut victimization? And then I discovered there were criminologists and there were psychologists and there were others who were out there way ahead of the curve on this. And when my colleague, TV presenter Jill Dando, was murdered, I proposed a new institute in her name with a new cross-cutting approach to crime that would recruit all the talents across a whole range of disciplines from A to Z. I mean, literally from architecture through computing, design, engineering, epidemiology, geography, physics, psychology, and literally through forensics to zoology. And Jill's death was the spark that lit that fuse. Jill was perhaps the most popular TV presenter of her generation, and the public gave well over £1 million to kickstart the initiative. We used the forget-me-not as a symbol, which is why it's a background for me and has been a background for the Jill Dando Institute. Now, why UCL? Because other universities offered us swanky premises, frankly. So why did we go to UCL, which offered no premises at all? In fact, they said they hadn't got any. But what the university did do is it gathered all the heads of department round, and they showed how UCL really understood the concept of bringing everyone together to help solve a pressing social problem. And after that, the only question was, well, how do you actually start a new discipline from scratch? And that is where Gloria Laycock comes in. She was one of those who was already way ahead of the curve on this. She was heading police research at the Home Office. She was on secondment from the Home Office, that's the UK Department of Home Affairs, to the United States and to Australia. Gloria, now Professor Gloria Laycock, what on earth attracted you to give up a proper job and apply as director of a department that didn't exist and a discipline that didn't exist either?
Funnily enough, Nick, the timing was perfect. A couple of colleagues suggested I apply for it, and I would never have applied if they hadn't suggested it. But I was coming to the end of my fellowship at NIJ, the National Institute of Justice in Washington, and I was planning on going to Australia on another fellowship at the end of 2000 for 4 months. And they said, apply. So I applied. A bit reluctantly, to be honest, because I was looking forward to staying in Australia beyond my 4-month fellowship. And Ron Clark said, no, the time to decide when you want a job is when you're offered it. Just apply. And of course, so I applied and I was interviewed, and the provost phoned me up that afternoon after the interview and said, we'd like to offer you the job. And I said, oh, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you. And then I remembered I was supposed to think about it. But I'd already enthused and said yes, and I obviously, in retrospect, I'm really glad I did. I insisted on going to Australia. The timing was perfect. My 4 months ended on around the 26th of April, which had been the anniversary of Jill's death. So I came back from Australia all on my own, turned up at UCL where they actually gave me a little room, and there was £1 million in the bank, and I was sold set up an institute.
How did you actually start? I mean, you had no oven-ready crime scientist to headhunt. You were literally starting on your own. How did you
it was great. I'd got this brief to set up a master's degree, and it turned out it takes about a year or ages, and you need people to teach on it as well. I persuaded a couple of academics to come over from the States to help on that. But meantime, I hired what I call BYTs. And BYTs are bright young things, and it happened that there were lots of them from Australia and New Zealand, all post, graduates and all keen on research and all looking for temporary jobs. So we hired them. They pulled in temporary research money and did some fantastic projects while we sorted out this master's degree. And they didn't stay, so they weren't permanently on our books, but they raised our profile, they did their research. And meantime, I was able to persuade some of the really fantastic academics, and they know who they are, who joined the Institute on the promise of a proper job one day when we were well established. They actually believed me, and they're still there, and they're all, you know, they're professors and so on in their own right, and they've been there ever since it started, and they are just fabulous.
Unlike criminology departments, which are usually in allied with sociology or in humanities or perhaps with law, you got the Jill Dando Institute into the engineering faculty eventually. Why engineering?
Well, we started off in public policy, and we weren't really well supported, if I'm absolutely honest. They sort of ignored us in some respects. But anyway, we were told to move into engineering around 2008, I think it was, and it was the best move we've ever made. I mean, I think people need to understand crime science is about dealing with problems. It's about bringing crime down. It's not about counting it or thinking about it or describing it. It's about dealing with it, managing it. And what engineers do, if you ask any engineer, they'll say, we solve problems. And that's what we do. We solve problems. And so it was the most fantastic opportunity, because we don't have to argue with engineers about solving problems. They think, well, what else would you do? And we don't have to argue with them about how good science is, because they think, well, obviously, so we can just get on with it. And it's just been fantastic. What we're trying to do now is to get the police to think like engineers, to think the way engineers think, to see crime as a problem to be solved, not simply as a single solution of let's go and arrest everybody or let's detect the crime, but far more think about how you can prevent it from happening in the first place. And that will involve all sorts of engineering solutions in the way we design society and the design the goods and services that we make such prolific use of.
Quite early on, Gloria, you had two extraordinary successes. One was getting this entirely new discipline and new department to get what are called great ref scores. You better explain what those are for non-academics. And you also got a shed load of money. Explain how you did both of those.
That, again, do you know what I found in the whole of my career, how serendipity kicks in? It's just, weren't we lucky? The research evaluation framework, the REF, is the way that the government shells out money to universities. And when we were first set up, we were told we had to aspire to get an absolutely outstanding REF score in the first tranche of that we were involved in. And I thought, I'm not signing up to that, we'll fail, it's all too difficult. In fact, not only did we not fail, we got the most fantastic scores in our very first try at it. So that was brilliant. And then, because we were in engineering, we were able to apply to one of the UK's research councils that funds engineering and science generally, and they're better funded. And so when we applied to them for, as it happened, over £7 million to set up a PhD programme, we wouldn't have been able to from public policy, we could from engineering. And the reason we got shortlisted was because I'd been on a committee, on the Home Secretary's committee, with an engineer who was on the shortlisting panel and said, oh, I know her, let her go through the first sift. And so we got through the first sift, and then to the interview stage when it's highly competitive. I had to go and make the case to physicists and mathematicians. And it was, and I took a really senior former chief constable with me, who was brilliant. And we were able to persuade them that what we wanted to do was introduce science and scientific method and all the things that come with science and engineering into solving crime problems. And to cut the long story short, obviously we got through that process, we got the £7 million. And as I was leaving, one of the physicists on the panel said, I wish I was a student these days, I'd like to take that course. And I thought, oh, that was great, that was great.
When you came back from these meetings, where did you go? Do you still have a chair in an office, or engineering faculty at least giving you something to
Well, it's
say?
a good question. UCL had given us this tiny space in Tavistock Square with no room to expand. But we'd also got £100,000 from HSBC as part of their contribution to the Jill Dando Fund, and I was expected to go and thank them for it. So I'm more than happy to thank them. So we went to see the bank, and amazingly, we got to see the head of HSBC Holdings, who manages the whole holding company for the bank, and the head of HSBC Bank for the UK. And the first thing he said was, "We've got no more money." And I said, "Oh, that's fine." When we chatted about crime science, and I'd sent him a copy of my inaugural lecture, and he said he'd found it really fascinating because it was describing crime science. He said it was so interesting, I got my wife to read it. So I thought, wow, that's amazing. And we had a nice chat. And as I was leaving, I just turned around and said, "Have you got any space?" And he said, "Find us some space." And I was just so glad. That was a throwaway line as I was leaving. The next day, they phoned up with 2 places for me to look at. Cut the long story short, we chose the one over the bank in Old Street. It was fabulous. I said, "Have you got any desks, maybe some chairs, and will you pay the bills?" And they just laughed and said, "Of course." Oh, well, we won't let you have it, they said, for less than 3 years. You'll need at least that to get yourselves established.
Tell us how then you moved into, I've got to be careful how I put this, you moved into organized crime and terrorism, which you did.
Yes, we did indeed. We had to expand. We had a master's program in crime science. We had the fabulous money from the EPSRC to set up our research program. We decided we needed a separate one on organized crime and terrorism. And we arranged the whole program, got it through the approvals and everything, and we wanted a high profile launch. And our dean at the time, Bernard Buxton, who'd been incredibly supportive, the Dean of Engineering, he was going to be involved in the launch, and I managed to persuade British Telecom to let us have the launch at the top of the BT Tower in London. And Bernard was absolutely ecstatic. It was the best thing he'd ever happened to him, this opportunity to go up there, and he'd always wanted to go. And I remember being at the top of the tower, what had been the restaurant, and the lift doors opened, and out shot Bernard like a bullet out of a gun, ran to the window screaming, "I've always wanted to see this place." It was delightful, and we had a fabulous launch, and that was one of our master's programs that's just gone on from strength to strength. It was clearly a need for it, and the point about the title was countering organized crime and terrorism. It's such an important concept to get across. It's not just about thinking about it or whatever, it's what are you going to do about it? And that thread runs through all the work that we do.
Of course, one of the things about terrorism is the police, the public, everybody understands you have to get in before the knife is drawn, before the bomb goes off. And you really, one needs to apply that to all of crime. You said that Bernard Buxton and the engineering faculty generally had been brilliantly supportive. What was UCL's biggest contribution?
You know what? I think the fact that they just left me in peace. They left me alone. And some people would think that was a really bad thing and I was unsupported, and it just wasn't. While we were at Old Street, for example, I didn't go to any meetings. I was just left in peace. I mean, our present, my successor, Richard Wortley, who took over from me, and Kate Bowers, who's now the director, they spent days at meetings, and I didn't have any to go to for years until we decided we needed to get back into UCL, by which time we were quite a substantial group of people. And the really great thing was they left me alone, and that meant I could take some risks. I could try things out, and I didn't have to defer to some boss or other. I was just left to it. Funnily enough, it was a bit like that when I set the police research group up in the Home Office, because my boss there was the head of police department. He was far too busy to worry about what I was doing. So I was used to the idea that I could be left alone in peace to get on with things.
By the time you left, I mean, the first decade was yours. There was a real thriving department. And then Richard, you came from Australia, to take over. I mean, presumably you called yourself a criminologist up to that point. You're a psychologist by background.
Well, yes. In fact, for a long time, I was head of department of a criminology school here in Brisbane. Look, the fame of the Jill Dando Institute had spread certainly beyond London and the UK. I knew about it very much, as did many people in Australia. I visited a couple of times. I saw Gloria when she was in her little office in the very early days with a half-time PA that she had to shout down the stairwell to issue instructions for. So it was certainly not an unknown quantity. Yes, I was a criminologist with a psychology background, but I was interested in a particular kind of criminology, one that's very, very sympathetic to crime science, and that is about trying to work out where crime occurs, why it occurs, and trying to do something about it. So there certainly wasn't a big leap for me to go from the things I'd been interested in my entire academic career, why crime was occurring, to coming to the Jill Dando Institute. And when I heard, that Gloria was stepping down from the role, I, was excited to seek out the opportunity to take over. And as I tell people, I had no particular wish to emigrate. I had a terrific job in Australia. I loved my job there. But this really just ticked all the boxes for the things I was interested in. And the idea that we had a single department that would do all of these things that for my whole career, was part of my guiding principles, was just too appealing. And as I say to people, it's the only job in the world that would have encouraged me to up sticks and travel 16,000 kilometers.
Well, let's come to what you achieved at the Institute in a moment, but I mean, you've become a great global champion of crime science. How do you explain what it is? Because I find most people assume it's either forensics or it's criminology.
Well, I think the short answer is to simply say crime science finds new ways to cut crime. And that's it in a sentence, but we can unpack that. I think there are three key features, some of which Gloria's already touched upon. But first of all, we're interested in crime as a phenomenon. And this is quite different to most criminologists, most psychologists if it comes to that, who are interested in criminals. They're interested in why people develop criminal propensities. And they operate on the basis that once you find out why people want to commit crime, then your job's done. You simply have to change the person in some way. Well, we know changing the person. I was a prison psychologist for 10 years, and I can tell you changing offenders, changing their dispositions is incredibly hard. So we shift the focus from the offender to the crime as an event. And we try to understand why crime occurs, where it does, and when it does, and what are the factors that contribute to it occurring. And certainly one of the factors is you've got an offender there who might have some propensity to commit crime. But then you've also got a location that allows that to occur. You've got a target that's vulnerable, whether that's a human being or some kind of property. And these elements all conspire, and for too long, criminologists have ignored the things other than the offender. The fact of the matter is, even the most predatory offender doesn't commit crime all the time, and many crimes are committed by people we don't regard as offenders. So that's the first element, a focus on the crime event. The other is, as Gloria said, we adopt a problem-solving scientific method. We try to apply the same kind of principles to solving these problems as a chemist might, as a physicist might, as a biologist might. And thirdly, again, as Gloria has hinted at, we're open to all disciplines. And that just doesn't mean psychologists and sociologists and maybe a lawyer. That does mean epidemiologists. I think it was you, Nick, saying, leading out that list. The Jill Dando Institute, at the moment, I think I'm right, the staff within it, we have something like 26 staff, I think, or academic staff, and we encompass 14 distinct disciplines from across the social sciences, geography, psychology, criminology, sociology, into the physical and engineering sciences, crime science, data science, electrical engineering, electronic engineering. And that is, I think, what makes us truly unique.
you hugely grew the department during your time in charge of it. How did you do that?
Well, I decided that the best way for us to move is to get more students for two reasons. One is that we're growing the new generation. So if we can take in more master's students who are already working in the field, but more so even undergraduate students who are looking for careers, then we can have a long-term change of policy, hopefully, within the criminal justice area. But the other is simple mathematics, is that's the way university departments are funded. And what I was able to do with the extra funding that came through extra students is hire some fantastic staff. Gloria has already, lauded our staff, but truly, if I'm proud of one thing in my 10 years of head of department, it's I've hired some really top-notch people.
And the university, when I mean, you've just now left university, the University College London. As you look back, what's your proudest achievement? I can see what you've done. How would you describe what you've achieved?
Well, look, I was standing on the shoulders of giants. When I came, Gloria had gone from her and a half-time PA into a solid, vibrant department. And I saw my job really just consolidating that. So I guess if I looked at my achievements, it would be to consolidate the growth that Gloria had started, to develop some new courses, to introduce an undergraduate degree. It had to be facetious, and if you ask the staff, I think most would say my crowning achievement was to buy a barbecue for our courtyard. So we did start to have Australian barbecues on a regular basis, and that could almost rank as my proudest achievement.
Don't underestimate your other great achievement there, which is to bring real leaf tea to University College London instead of tea bags.
Yes, no.
To what extent have you shifted the public debate and the political debate? I mean, there has definitely been a move during your time from thinking if we can lock people up, we're going to solve crime, to recognizing there are actually much rather smarter things we can do. How much have you managed to shift that debate?
I don't know how much we can. I think that debate has certainly shifted. It goes up and down depending on political, flavors and so forth. For example, I've spent a lot of time in Gloria's old employer, the Home Office, on various committees and so forth. And it got to the point where you didn't have to explain to them what opportunity reduction meant. They were using terms that we would use routinely. Now, how much we did that individually, presumptuous for me to say. I'd also say that I think criminology as a discipline has shifted quite dramatically in the 20 years that the JDI has been around. When we first started, and Gloria can talk to this more eloquently than I can, we really were peripheral in criminology, the sorts of things we did to understand what pubs are the most violent and what we can do to those pubs that reduce violence. The focus on the geographic analysis of crime, those sorts of things, looking at crime as a phenomenon as opposed to just offenders. These were pretty peripheral, and we were regarded, I think, as fairly peripheral from mainstream criminology. But now, as we look around, most criminology departments have people that we would call fellow travelers that are interested in the things that we're interested in. Many of them, in fact, are our own graduates. We've been seeding many UK universities with some of our fantastic, again, graduates. But there has been a shift as well. I think people are realizing that if we're going to, that tackling crime, reducing crime ought to be our main mission. And B, if we do that, then we need to bring in more disciplines. We need a much more methodical approach to it.
You described how there were graduates who'd been seated everywhere, and the third director was somebody who already knew what crime science was already deeply embedded in the idea. Kate, tell us what you've achieved, what attracted you to take over as director?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate, as you said, Nick, because I've kind of been there for a lot of the story of the JDI. So I moved to the JDI when Gloria was incredibly persuasive to me back in 2004. So I've been there as the department has changed and evolved and developed. And I've always been really amazed at how energetic and changeable the place can be from the point of view of the staff really wanting to go on to the next thing. We've never stayed still as an institute, and this is one thing that I really like about working in the place. It's so dynamic. Again, being really interested in this idea of crime science generally and my own understanding of crime science. I think I've been more a crime scientist in my career than I have a criminologist or anything else, because I've been doing this for the vast majority of my career. So I see myself as a crime scientist. And when Richard decided that it was time for him to go back to Australia and do some other things, I just thought it was a natural thing for me to step up and take on that position as director, because I care about the place massively, and I can see some things that I can do as a director that I hope can really support what's been done already, and also with a vision towards changing things in the future.
You talk about the future. One of the extraordinary things about the Jill Dando Institute is you have a professor of future crime, a whole section looking. Just explain what that means.
Yeah, so one of the really important things that we should be doing is looking forward. And this is one thing that we're actually pretty good at doing as the Jill Dando Institute. So it's this idea of getting ahead of the crime and security game by understanding what's on the horizon in terms of problems and coming up with preemptive solutions. So trying to get ahead of the curve. New technologies offer fantastic opportunities for everybody, but they can also offer issues with security and, for example, the Internet of Things or driverless vehicles are some examples of great technologies, but they can also be manipulated from the point of view of crime issues and problems. So whilst they're great technologies to have, we also need to keep an eye on the security implications of these new kinds of developments and technologies. On the other hand, of course, we can use those new technologies in order to help us with crime and security problems as well. So the idea of the Dawes Institute is basically to take those new ideas about the way that things are changing from a societal and technological point of view, and think about both the opportunities for crime, but also the opportunities for new types of ways of preventing crime and reducing problems and hopefully preempting them before they happen.
Richard was talking about the importance of measurable impacts, getting the police to think about problem solving rather than answering just an immediate call, emergency call, and then going off, or arresting someone and saying, well, that's a crime solved. And you're working now closely with the police. Explain that a bit.
Yeah, so one of the things we really want to do moving forward is to further develop our policing education capacities. We've already come a long way with that. But our vision is really to improve the effectiveness of 21st century policing in general through research-led teaching. And by research-led teaching, we're talking about teaching that spans all the way from continuing professional development courses, shorter courses, all the way through now to PhD research. There is a need to educate our police colleagues at PhD level. And we've been talking to the Metropolitan Police recently about the fact there is this need to undertake research from the point of view of some of the most senior officers really wanted to get involved in doing that themselves. So because we have this technological and societal change, we need to make sure that we understand the ways that the demand for policing is also changing. And the great thing is, I think as crime scientists, we're incredibly well placed to teach students about things like problem solving, about security technologies, about cybersecurity, but also importantly about things like policing powers and policing ethics and public trust. And I think all those things are necessary in terms of assisting the police force to have the kind of understanding that's necessary as we're moving forward with future problems and future concerns.
One of the problems of policing in all societies, but including the UK, is the tension between police who represent the government, represent state, represent law and order, and some communities. What are you doing to get a greater diversity, to get a greater buy-in by everybody?
So we have a Institute for Global Cities Policing, and there Ben Bradford, who is the director, is working very closely with the Metropolitan Police, but also with the public, to see what it is that we can do to understand that trust relationship between the public and the police. So a lot of the work that's done in that institute is understanding how it is that we can actually make the police act in a way which not only makes the place safer, but also is very sensitive to the needs of communities, and that understands the fact that the public want policing to happen in a certain way to make them feel safer and secure in their own environment. So we really do make sure that we think about things like police ethics and public trust, as much as thinking about some of the techniques we might use to try and make neighbourhoods safer.
UCL is regarded, and thinks of itself too, as a global university, and I think I'm right saying more than half of the undergraduates doing crime science are from outside the UK. To what extent is crime science becoming a truly international discipline? I mean, to what extent has it grown from, you know, Gloria's one chair and one part-time PA into something that's truly international?
I think that that's an interesting evolution in terms of the way that the student body has changed over the years. I think we used to have lots of people who were home students, who were perhaps practitioners and could study part-time. But more recently, looking at our current applications, we seem to be having almost as many international students applying as we do home students now, and it could well be the case that the international students become the majority. So I think they're attracted to us because of the fact that we have got this, because of the crime science approach actually being not something that's on offer in all places, is only on offer in certain places, and more people are attracted to the fact that we have this real, very practical problem-solving approach, and they come to us for that reason. And I think that international reputation has been developed over the time that Gloria and Richard have been with us. A lot of our staff have been fantastic at having international links with different academic institutions, but also with practitioners in different places such as New Zealand and Australia and the US. And for example, we have the Latin America Caribbean unit now, which is looking to really educate and collaborate with police practitioners in Latin America. Some of it we've done as a purposeful strategy in terms of really connecting us in on the international stage.
And when I've spoken to you in the past, the one thing you keep talking about is having a measurable impact on social well-being. How do you measure it?
Well, that's a very tricky thing. And I think we've got better at measuring it, partly because of the fact that the research excellence framework is asking us to undertake impact case studies. And by that, what we mean is they say, well, you've done this piece of work, you know, you've done some fantastic work in counterterrorism, but how can we actually really see that you've made a difference? And so we have started to collect information together from a variety of places in terms of what it is that we've actually done to make a measurable difference. So, for example, with the case study approaches that we've been taking recently, we've been looking at the degree to which, for example, our work in counterterrorism and extremism has really changed the way that practitioners are looking to risk assess people from the point of view of them moving into terrorism and extremism, and from the point of view of forensics, for example, which is another area that we have lots of expertise in. We've been looking at how forensic evidence is used in court, and whether or not there needs to be improvements about the way that forensic evidence is used. From the point of view of our work in trafficking, we've been looking at why it is that trafficking has very little evidence indeed in terms of what is effective, and what we can do to start improving our evidence bases in terms of the way that trafficking is undertaken, and what we need to be doing as practitioners to go about trying to reduce some of those terrible problems at that sort of level. So yes, one of the things that we've been doing as part of the anniversary celebrations is putting together a number of short videos on the impact that some of our work has had. So I'd really recommend people go and have a look at some of those, which will be coming out over the next few months.
Okay, thank you, Kate and Richard and Gloria. I mean, most academic disciplines, or certainly a lot of them, lead to real world applications, but the three of you have forged a whole new academic department, one which, as you say, Kate, has measurable impact on social well-being. So to you three proud parents of what's no longer a teenager, but a fully fledged new discipline, happy birthday and many, many thanks.